They weren't betting on cattle, not gold, not land. That night in Deadwood, they were betting on a child. A little girl, 6 years old, barefoot, bruised, wrapped in a torn nun's habit like holiness thrown in the mud. And when Eli Turner laid his final card on that smoky table, he didn't know he'd just gambled for something more powerful than land or bullets. He'd just bought an angel. What happens when the devil lays down his wager? But the Lord answers with a child. Subscribe now and stay to the end. Because this isn't just a story of a rancher and a little nun. It's a parable carved in gunpowder and grace, where the smallest voice carries the loudest truth. And one wild bet changes everything. They say the Lord don't ride west of the Mississippi. But I reckon they never saw what I saw. On a rainy night in Deadwood, 1885. The saloons were full and the prayers were empty. Men played cards with hands that had spilled blood, drank whiskey like it might burn the devil out of them. I was one of them, Eli Turner, a rancher on the edge of ruin. My fences were broken, my cattle sick. My wife asleep at home, wondering if I still had a soul left to save. That night, I sat across from Clay Rohr, the kind of man hell would spit out for being too mean. The pot was high. I didn't have the cash, but he said I got something else to wager. Then he whistled, and from the shadows came a little girl, no more than 6. Barefoot, bruised, wrapped in a tattered black habit, the kind nuns wear when God is their only roof. She's a stray from a burned-down convent, Rohr said, like he was offering a mule. The last scrap of holiness in a godless town. I should have walked. I didn't. And I won. Not money, not pride, but something else entirely. She said her name was Sister Clara, soft as wind, quiet as candlelight. Barely spoke, just bowed her head, whispered grace over stale cornbread, and slept curled up like a lamb behind the stove. My wife Rosalind cried the first night, said we weren't fit to raise a girl from God's house. But Clara didn't ask to be saved. She just lived like someone who had already forgiven the world for what it did to her. Folks say I brought home a burden. Truth is, I brought home a blessing. Because somehow, that child turned our little ranch into a church without pews. She prayed over the cattle, and they got stronger. She hummed old hymns while we mended fences, and the days felt lighter. And when trouble came looking, when Rohr sent his guns to take her back, she didn't scream. She stood in the field hands, folded eyes lifted to heaven. And for 1 second, even the bullets seemed to hesitate. I used to think God didn't care about places like ours. Too dusty, too damned. But I was wrong. Sometimes he doesn't send thunder. He sends a child with bruised knees and a broken voice to remind us that grace can bloom even in dry soil. So if you're listening and you think it's too late, that your land, your life, your soul has dried up, remember Deadwood. And remember Sister Clara. Because sometimes the Lord walks into a saloon, sits down at the table, and lays his bet. And when he does, he always wins. Sometimes the wildest bet isn't made for money. It's made for something heaven was never meant to leave lying in the mud. And if this story's stirring something in you, if you've ever believed that God still works through small hands and broken hearts, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Leave a like to let me know you're still with me. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever seen grace come from the most unexpected place? Because what happened next wasn't just about saving a child. It was about saving a house where silence had settled like dust, and watching it breathe again. After that night in Deadwood, after the cards were played and my hands shook with both shame and grace, I brought the little nun home. The rain hadn't stopped. It followed us the whole way back, like God wasn't finished washing the dust off my soul. Rosalind met us on the porch, arms crossed, eyes hard. What in God's name have you done, Eli Turner? I didn't have an answer. Not a good one, anyway. Just stepped down from the wagon, lifted the sleeping child into my arms, and said, "Her name's Sister Clara." She weighed near nothing, but somehow it felt like I was carrying a cathedral. That first week, the house went quiet. Not awkward quiet, sacred quiet. Clara hardly spoke. She ate little, slept, curled up on a pallet by the fireplace, and each morning, just before sunrise, she'd kneel by the back window, facing east, waiting for the light. She didn't ask for anything. Didn't cry, didn't laugh either. Just folded her hands every dawn like she was listening for instructions from someone we couldn't see. I once asked her, "Why always the window?" She answered without turning her head, "Because that's where morning comes. And God is in the morning." And just like that, a house that had been cracked by silence, by miscarriages, drought, and too many unspoken griefs started to breathe again. Rosalind was the first to soften. She caught Clara humming a hymn one evening, barefoot in the garden, hands covered in dirt planting cabbage. My wife just watched her tears in her eyes and said, "That child ain't planting vegetables. She's planting peace." Clara never preached, never quoted scripture. But when a storm blew the roof loose, she sat by the window all night, whispering psalms into the wind. And in the morning, we found the old cross that had fallen from the barn wall standing upright in the mud like someone placed it there. Coincidence, maybe. But we'd seen too much dry land to not believe in sudden rain. She taught us not with words, but with presence. Taught Rosalind to trust again. Taught me to kneel not out of desperation, but thanksgiving. And slowly, the house changed. Not the furniture, not the wood, the air. It smelled like bread and hope. People came by looking for work or water and left with something else, a sense they couldn't name. "Feels different here," they'd say. "Like God's closer than he was a mile back." Maybe he was, because sometimes God don't show up in thunder. Sometimes he shows up in a little girl in a torn habit and turns a forgotten house into holy ground. Peace had finally found the house, but out here, peace always comes with a shadow. If the story's pulling at something in, you hit like, tap, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, have you ever felt calm just before the storm, because in the hills beyond Silver Creek, trouble was already stirring. It had been a month since Sister Clara came into our lives. By then the house had softened. The cattle were stronger. The wind didn't sound so lonely. But peace, my friend, peace has enemies. One morning, I found her outside by the fence line, arms stretched out like she was catching the sun. A white bird had landed on her shoulder, still as a whisper. She smiled at it just once before it flew. She turned to me and said, "He's coming, that's all. No name." But my gut knew exactly who she meant. Clay Rohr, the man I'd beaten in cards. The man who'd put a child of God on the table like she was a bottle of whiskey. I thought I'd taken something from him that night. But truth is, Clara had taken something from him long before I ever showed up. Later that evening, as Rosalind baked bread and the sun bled orange across the hills, I found Clara sitting on the back steps, holding something wrapped in cloth. She looked up and said, "This used to belong to Father Pierre. He gave it to me before the fire." She unwrapped it slowly, like it might still burn. It was a letter. A page torn from an old Bible, the back covered in ink. I could hardly read the words. Names, dates, payments, payoffs. Men of law with prices on their honor. Church coffers bled dry. And at the bottom, scrawled in shaking script, "If I do not live to tell it, let the truth ride west." Father Pierre had tried to expose Clay Rohr's dealings, his bribes, his violence, his silence bought in silver. But the convent never stood a chance. They burned it to the ground, called it an accident. And Clara, the only one left breathing. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She shrugged, too small to carry such a weight. Because truth only matters if someone's brave enough to protect it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, rifle in my lap, watching the tree line. And sure enough, just before dawn I saw it. A shadow on horseback, no closer than the edge of our property, but close enough to smell the fear. They were watching, waiting, not just for Clara, but for the words she carried, the proof she'd been chosen to survive, and cursed to remember. I looked back at that little girl curled on the floor in front of the fireplace holding a rosary like a sword. And I realized something. God doesn't always send warriors. Sometimes he sends witnesses. And the devil, friend, You don't like to be seen. Some truths are too dangerous to keep. And some lies are the only way to save a life. If this story's stirring your spirit, tap. Subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts below. What would you risk to protect someone you love because Eli Turner was about to lie to the devil himself and trust that God would still hear him? There comes a time when a man must lie, not for his own soul, but for someone else's. I rode into Deadwood just after sundown. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't kiss Rosalind's hand. Just saddled my horse, tucked that old letter from Father Pierre into my coat, and prayed like I hadn't in years. They say you can't bargain with the devil, but sometimes you don't get a choice. You just walk into the fire, hoping to keep someone else from burning. The Silver Ace Saloon hadn't changed. Same stench, same smoke, same hollow men pretending to laugh at nothing. And there in the back corner, like a spider waiting in its web, was Clay Rohr. He looked up and grinned when he saw me. Well now. The prodigal rancher returns. I didn't sit. I dropped the letter on the table, the one Clara had hidden in her habit, the one Father Pierre died for. Rohr's smile twisted when he recognized the handwriting. He picked it up slow like it might bite him. "Where's the girl?" he asked. And I lied. With the most honest voice I ever had, I said, "She's dead. Buried under 6 feet of Dakota mud." Rohr's eyes narrowed, searching for cracks. But I stood still, didn't blink, because sometimes the truth is too holy for a sinner to hold. "And the letter?" he asked. I nodded at it. "It's yours, the only copy. I burned the rest." Another lie, but wrapped in enough dust and fear to pass for gospel. In return, I said, "You forget we exist. Me, my wife, and that child's name." He leaned back, running a hand over his chin. A long silence stretched between us, the kind where hell holds its breath. "You're a fool," he finally muttered. "You think a paper changes anything?" I met his gaze. "No, but you know what'll happen if it gets out. Even the rats in this town will turn on you." He stared a moment longer, then folded the letter and slipped it into his vest. "Fine," he said. "The girl's a ghost. But you crossed me again, Turner. You come near my land again, Rohr." I interrupted, "You won't ride back." I walked out without turning around. Didn't exhale until I saw the stars. It rained that night on my way home. Cold, gentle rain, the kind that washes guilt clean, even if the stain never fully leaves. When I got back, Clara stood barefoot on the porch. She didn't ask what happened, just looked up at me with those still wolfish eyes. I bent down, touched her shoulder. "You're safe," I said, "for now." She didn't answer, just reached for my hand and held it like she already knew the cost. And that's when I realized, sometimes a lie born from love can save a soul, not just hers, but mine too. 5. The thing about peace is, it don't always come with trumpets. Sometimes it comes quiet, like a barefoot child kneeling by the garden fence, whispering thanks before sunrise. After Deadwood, after that white lie saved her life and damned my sleep, Silver Creek changed. Clara still prayed every morning, still wore her patched black habit like armor. But now, she didn't just pray for herself. She prayed for others. And one by one, they came. The first was a boy named Daniel, no older than 10. I found him sleeping in the hayloft, skin and bones, holding a rusted tin cross. He didn't talk, didn't run either. Clara was the one who brought him bread and sat beside him until he stopped shaking. "He reminds me of the boys at the convent," she said softly. Only no sisters left to find him now. Then came Ruth, all elbows and bruises. Then Thomas, who never said a word but could fix a fence straighter than most grown men. And then more. Children who didn't belong anywhere. Except here. Rosalind began calling it the Lord's Detour. I reckon she was right. It wasn't long before Clara, still no taller than the gatepost, was teaching them the ways of the land. How to milk a cow, how to braid rope, how to hold a hammer without fear. But she also taught them how to bow their heads. Not out of shame, but reverence. Sometimes I'd watch her from the porch, the way she walked through the barn, calm and certain, a little Bible clutched to her chest. like she wasn't just caring for livestock. She was tending souls. One afternoon I asked her, "You sure you want all this ranch, these kids, this weight?" She looked at me firm as stone and said, "I ain't just living here, Mr. Turner. I'm building something, so no one ever has to be left behind again." That night, I wept behind the barn. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood. God hadn't sent Clara here for us to save her. He sent her here to save us. Now folks ride in from as far as Nebraska, not to trade cattle, but to leave behind the lost a boy, too wild a girl, too silent. And every time Clara meets them barefoot in the dirt, hand outstretched, like she's been waiting their whole life. Silver Creek ain't just a ranch no more. It's a sanctuary, a fence-lined chapel, a second chance wrapped in prairie dust and warm cornbread. And that little nun, the one the devil tried to wager and the Lord redeemed, she's the beating heart of it all. So if you're listening and you wonder if one soul can make a place holy again, come visit Silver Creek. We'll leave the gate open. Ket by. This story isn't just about a ranch or a little nun rescued by chance. It's about how grace finds its way into even the harshest places. Through Sister Clara, we see that the smallest among us can carry the greatest light. A child once discarded became a shepherd of the broken. A man once hardened by failure rediscovered faith through quiet love. The true message is this: God doesn't always work through thunder or miracles. Sometimes he speaks through silent service and second chances. In a world of noise and violence, Sister Clara reminds us that redemption is not only possible, it's contagious. When we protect the vulnerable, feed the lost, and forgive what others fear, we become the hands of Christ in a wild and weary world. This isn't just a Western tale. It's a gospel written in dust, blood, and grace. If this story stirred something in you, then don't stop here. Click on the next story waiting just down the trail where faith is tested, hearts are broken, and maybe, just maybe, redemption rides again.